The son of the CIA deputy director died in Ukraine fighting for the occupier. Moscalik was burned as a result of a car explosion near Moscow. The full text of the proposals made by the US for achieving peace was presented in Paris. You will see all of this in this episode. Trump is disappointed with Putin but is afraid to pressure Russia. Meanwhile, in the US, they are shouting about Trump's weakness and impotence, sympathizing with Ukraine. You are on the Ukraine Today channel. Watch this and more in this episode. The son of the CIA deputy director died in Ukraine fighting for Russia. It is known that Michael Gloss initially participated in anti-war protests and hippie movements in the US, but later, after radically changing his views, became interested in fighting against Western hegemony and the ideas of a multipolar world.
His mother, Julian Gloss, holds the position of Deputy Director of the Central Intelligence Agency of the USA. His father, Larry Gloss, is a veteran of the US Navy and the head of security on Information Systems, a company that develops software including for the US Department of Defense.
Gloss joined the Russian army in 2023, after traveling around the world for several months.
Over time, Michael began calling himself Hamza, became a supporter of Palestine, got addicted to conspiracy videos, and started talking about the ideas of a multipolar world.
In Moscow, he signed a contract with the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation and went to the front, where a year ago he became part of the casualty statistics. He served in the Ryazan Airborne Regiment. Moscalik burned near Moscow. In Balashikha, the deputy head of the main operational directorate of the General Staff of the Russian Federation, Yaroslav Moscalik, was blown up.
The deceased deputy head of the main operational directorate of the Russian Federation, Yaroslav Moscalik, was passing by the exploding Volkswagen Golf at the moment of the explosion. Immediately after that, his body was thrown several meters away. The car, preliminarily packed with explosives, could have been deliberately driven to the house where the military officer lived.
Russian propagandists immediately found a Ukrainian trace in the murder of General Moscalik. However, who would doubt that they would find it there?
The last owner of the car, from the explosion of which Yaroslav Moscalik died, was Ignat Kuzin, a native of the Ukrainian city of Sumy. Since 2015, Kuzin's place of permanent residence has been listed as Karachay-Cherkessia.
Kuzin purchased the Volkswagen Golf in early February of the 25th year. Today, the car exploded near the entrance of a high-rise building in Balashikha, Moscow region as General Moscalik was passing by. According to Russian media, the car was equipped with a homemade explosive device and a surveillance camera. Trump's approach is already raising questions and doubts within the United States. The latest cover of the New York Post depicts Trump's weakness and impotence in front of Putin, raising the right questions. The tweet mentions the following: an enraged Trump criticizes Putin after Russia's deadliest attack on Ukraine in almost a year, which hindered peace talks, and also quotes Trump with his statement, "Vladimir, stop." The cover shows one of the victims of the Russian terrorist attack on Ukraine, and it is written that words are not enough, and also that Trump is pleading with Putin to stop while Putin shows disdain. At the same time, the Wall Street Journal states that Trump is secretly annoyed by Putin's hardline stance on Ukraine.
He is surprised that the Kremlin is not meeting halfway despite Kiev's concessions. Now Trump's team is racking their brains. Should they pressure Moscow for a deal, which might ruin his plan to improve relations with Russia?
Previously, there was talk in the US about a bill to impose 500% tariffs on Russian oil and raw materials as sanctions. But how ready the US is to turn these threats into reality is a big question. But one positive aspect is that the US is publicizing Russia's terrorist attacks on Ukraine.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
The proposals for a peace agreement with Ukraine, presented by the US at the talks in Paris, are as follows. I suggest we briefly discuss the main points that were talked about during the negotiations. And let's start with the fact that the US de jure recognizes Crimea as Russian. The US de facto recognizes Russia's control over the Luhansk region, as well as its control over parts of the Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Kherson regions. In other words, it is about freezing the conflict along the current front line. Ukraine, on the other hand, fully regains the Kharkiv region, reclaims ownership of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, but transfers control to the US, with electricity being distributed to both sides, meaning both Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine regains control over the Kharkovka hydroelectric power plant as well as the Kinburn spit. Regarding the immediate ceasefire, Ukraine receives security guarantees from Europe, and Ukraine will not attempt to join NATO, but will retain the possibility of joining the EU. Honestly, those are rather weak security guarantees. Ukraine will be completely reconstructed. This concerns the economy, and it will also receive full financial compensation. The US and Ukraine are implementing economic cooperation, as outlined in the resource agreement. Sanctions imposed on Russia back in 2014 will be completely lifted, and the US and Russia will cooperate in the energy sectors. Additionally, the EU and Ukraine demand security guarantees from the US similar to NATO's Article 5. In turn, the president of Ukraine stated that he will not make concessions when it comes to recognizing Ukrainian territories as part of Russia. Share your opinion in the comments. It seems that the world is plunging into total war, a new flashpoint of war between India and Pakistan. On Tuesday, militants killed at least 26 people and injured about a dozen in the disputed Himalayan region. While authorities investigate the attack, tensions between India and Pakistan are only increasing, despite Pakistan denying any involvement in the attack. But India's Foreign Minister Vikram Misri stated,
Cross-border links to the terrorist act were identified during a special session of his country's security cabinet.
All but one of the 26 tourists killed during the attack were Indian citizens. And New Delhi quickly pointed the finger at Pakistan. Pakistan denies its involvement and states that any attempt to stop or divert water belonging to Pakistan will be considered an act of war. Meanwhile, after talks in Paris, Trump's envoy Witkoff arrived in Moscow. Watch this segment to see how Trump addresses Putin after the brutal attack on Kyiv and about Witkoff's visit to Putin.
Following the failed negotiations in London, Witkoff urgently flew to Russia to discuss everything happening with Putin. This, by the way, is already their fourth meeting.
It is evident that Witkoff, quite often during these negotiations, absorbs a significant amount of Russian narratives and then broadcasts them, yes, and at times forgets that he is a representative of the Western world, that he is a representative of the USA, and echoes Russian propaganda. This is largely a problem.
Donald Trump announced the conclusion of a peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia almost, this week. But again, something went wrong. Recognition of Crimea as Russian, refusal to join NATO, and lifting sanctions from Russia. It's very strange why Ukraine did not agree to this.
And I think we have reached an agreement with Russia. We need to come to an agreement with Zelensky. I think we have an agreement with Russia. We need to reach an agreement with Zelensky. I thought it would be easier to negotiate with him, but it turned out to be more difficult. I think we will have an agreement with both sides.
It's strange. Why is Zelensky always dissatisfied? Maybe because Russia gets everything and Ukraine gets nothing. Here's what Trump replied to a journalist's question about Crimea.
I just want the war to end. I don't care how. If both sides are satisfied and sign an agreement, that's good. I don't have favorites, and I don't want to take sides.
Recognizing the annexation of Crimea at an official level could significantly trigger China into any open military actions against Taiwan. This is additional fuel to the fire of the conflict smoldering in the Middle East. And it's obvious that by pandering to Putin's authoritarian dictatorial regime, Trump is opening up a lot of potential problems for himself personally.
According to CNN, the US demands the agreement to be concluded within the first 100 days of Trump's presidency, which means by April 30th. Trump, however, promised to resolve everything in 24 hours, and then within 100 days.
Trump promised to end the war in 24 hours, but we didn't specify on which exact day.
Could this really be the reason for such haste?
For Washington, it was important to reach some sort of agreement within the first 100 days of Trump's presidency. And this is yet another Rubicon that the American administration had drawn for themselves. By studying Trump's behavior, one can somewhat trace a pattern that, in principle, not at moments when he realizes he doesn't control the situation, he starts to apply maximum pressure, ultimatums, and manipulations.
Trump also stated that he would meet with Putin later than planned. Earlier, there was talk of a meeting in the Middle East in May.
It is evident that Trump wants to bring a deal to the meeting with Putin. That will be as favorable as possible for the Kremlin dictator. And in principle, the peace initiatives and plan points that were presented to Western allies, primarily Ukraine, were not suitable. And we saw a consolidated position first from Kyiv, then supported by the French. And meeting with Putin at the present moment, does not have any high political expediency.
Meanwhile, the USA continues to justify the Russian Federation. Rubio stated that now they better understand Russia's position because they finally talked to them after 3 years of silence.
The position of the United States has transformed so much that today it looks almost identical to what Russia demands. And today, precisely in the diplomatic context, the Americans are subtly demanding that Ukraine capitulate. And it is obvious that this does not please the probably now former allies in the form of Europe and Kyiv itself.
Earlier, Rubio stated that the states are ready to abandon efforts to achieve peace in Ukraine if they see no progress in this direction in the coming days.